Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. 'Twas blind, but now I see. Good folks of St. Andrews, this is such a joy to come to you in this way and just have a few brief, call them fireside chats, since we're here in the Great Hall of St. Andrews, chats about what is grace? What does it mean? What does it feel like? And maybe in some ways, what grace is not. I'm convinced that that's often a struggle for us. Even if we quote the scriptures, like in Ephesians 2, where Paul says, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, it is a gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast." But you know, my experience with grace probably is similar to many of you. There are times in my life where I rest on God's unmerited favor, that is, absolute and total forgiveness, where I'm reminded of the scriptures in John where it says, "You didn't choose me, I chose you." And I sometimes get messed up. I forget about God's promises and how He's addressed us and come to us in person, not sending us a photograph, but actually showing up as a human being. I sometimes forget that God, who knew no suffering or pain or any want, descends into the human condition. We say it every Sunday, every time we gather around the creed, that He came and was born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, was buried, and on the third day He rose again. We know the theology. And I, perhaps like you, sometimes forget. Grace is not a matter of kind of plucking the daisy. You've seen me do this in sermons where, you know, imagine a daisy in front of you, plucking the petals. He loved me. He loved me not. He loved me. He loved me not. And we sometimes get stuck in some kind of ambivalence, perhaps, about just how much does God love us. Again, it's almost possible, I think the human condition moves in this direction, to put conditions somehow on the love and mercy of God. And we move into some kind of thinking that it's about my performance. If I just think in a certain way or pray in a certain way, if I relate to everybody in a loving fashion, then God will love me. I call it the if-then codicil. If I do this, then God will love me and forgive me. But you know, there's a trap in that. The trap is we forget the disciples, those first followers of Jesus. They were terribly ambivalent. And thank God we have the Gospels and the writings of Paul, where we see their doubt and their struggle. One day they're for Jesus Christ, and the next day they're against Him. They're just they're a motley crew. Sort of like you and me at St. Andrews. We are a motley crew. We're sinners saved by grace, not by our performance. And you know, at St. Andrews, this is absolutely vital for us right now. We're in this place where we're living in a grace-filled moment. There's not a whole lot that we can do. For example, we're hopeful of moving on eventually getting the process done where we are able to get a brand new rector to come and serve the flock here. But we know we're all in a pause moment. P-A-U-S-E, that is. We're put on pause by the coronavirus. And we're separated. We aren't able to worship, to gather around Holy Eucharist, and to be nurtured by just the warmth of the good people of St. Andrew's. And yet, God is present now with His amazing grace as we, in a way, are forced to rest on Him, to lean into the person of Jesus Christ. You know, Paul Tillich, one of the great theologians of the church many years ago, said the most difficult thing in life is to accept our acceptance. Think about that just for a minute. The most difficult thing in life, he says, when it comes to God, is to accept our acceptance. That He's already moved on our behalf, made it possible for us to live in promise and hope and peace. You know, during these little fireside chats, when we talk about grace, I'm going to refer to Brennan Manning's wonderful book. Some of you know about it. It's entitled The Ragamuffin Gospel. You know, ragamuffins, as he uses the term, are people oftentimes who feel left out. They're not the center of the conversation. They're kind of people on the margins, and they certainly aren't necessarily really highly developed church people. But in a real sense, all of us are ragamuffins. You know, on a Sunday morning, when you and I come to church, just think of it this way. Most of us are walking with crutches. I don't mean a crutch of faith or a crutch in believing in God. That's not a crutch, that's trust. But I'm talking about our everyday uncertainties, our brokenness, our anxieties, our fears. For some of us who are aging, we are just grateful to be able to get out of bed in the morning. But we all have uncertainties. We're not sure about where this coronavirus thing is going or where the future of St. Andrew's exactly will land. But we come in the middle of our uncertainties and brokenness or unstableness into the presence of one who meets us and greets us as we actually are, not for what we could become. I think that's why Paul Tillich is correct. It's so difficult to simply accept our already given acceptance. Well, now, Brennan Manning has a wonderful way of thinking about the gospel, this good news that we're talking about, the grace of God. Let me put it in his words. He says, the gospel declares that no matter how dutiful or prayerful we are, we can't save ourselves. What Jesus did was sufficient. And he goes on to say, to the extent that we're all self-made saints like the Pharisees or neutral like Pilate, never making the leap and trust, we let the prostitutes and publicans go first into the kingdom, while we in Flannery O'Connor's unforgettable image are in the background having our alleged virtues burnt out of us. Wow! That's Brennan Manning speaking about what the gospel is. The gospel is the good news of God's amazing grace for everyone. Not just a select few where we circle the wagons and we're the insiders and then there's them outsiders. Because we're reminded that Jesus' closest friends weren't insiders. Now, he fellowshiped with the religious leaders, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and other people, and powerful people as well. But, you know, it's always amazing that Jesus' closest friends They were on the margins of the society of his time. And you know it without overstating, but the lepers, the prostitutes, the tax collectors, people who really socially were pariahs. Jesus' love, in other words, is for everyone. You know, one of my favorite hymns, I know it's probably one of Mary Jo's too, it's "All Creatures of Our God and King." That's one of the great hymns in our Episcopal hymnal. All creatures of our God and King, they sing to God. There is no one who's above their creatureliness. We didn't make ourselves, but we have been made in the image of God. That has to be grace. He's given us life. He's given us breath, heartbeat. He's giving us hopes and dreams. And we at St. Andrew's really are resting on his hopes and his dreams for us. You know, God isn't finished with us. He's constantly creating and recreating each one of us into new beings. It's a slow process. Sometimes we make one step forward and then 2 steps back. But you see, that's what grace is about. It isn't about winning and being the most successful church in the community or the successful person. But it is about resting in him, trusting that God actually knows what he's doing with us, which I find to be truly amazing grace. That he knows what he's doing with you and with me and with St. Andrew's. It is true. So let us rest in that amazing grace, accepting our full acceptance in him. Thanks so much for listening to this first segment on grace, and we'll continue these little fireside chats together. God bless you all.